Design-based research is a design that is flexible and meant to go through multiple iterations and changes so that not only are existing theories supported, but also introduce new theories to be further studied. Some common features of design-based research are the result in the production of theories on learning and teaching. Intervening should be part of the design. They'll take place in naturalistic contexts, should go through multiple iterations. It is meant to be a loop. Each time that you adjust, you are experimenting with something different. Some differences between design based and psychological experimentation. The location of research in a psychological experimentation, the research is conducted in laboratory settings, whereas in design based research, it's going to occur in buzzing, blooming confusion of real life settings where most of the learning actually does occur. The complexity of variables with psychological, you're usually dealing with one or a couple of variables, where in design based research, you're going to be involving multiple dependent variables, including climate variables, collaboration among learners, available resources, outcome variables, learning of content, transfer, system variables, dissemination, and sustainability. The focus of research for psychological experimentation is usually going to focus on identifying a few variables and holding them constant, whereas in the design based research, it's going to focus on characterizing the situation and all of its complicity. Um, Unfolding the procedures, uh, psychological uses fixed procedures, where design based uses it involves flexible design revision, in which there's a tentative initial set that are revised depending on their success in the practice. The social interaction, the amount of social interaction for psychological is they're going to try to isolate the learner to control the interaction, whereas in design based, it's frequently going to involve complex social interactions with participants, sharing their ideas, distracting each other, and so on. Um, when we characterize the findings in psychological, we're going to focus on testing the hypothesis, whereas in design based, we're looking at multiple aspects of the design and developing a profile that characterizes the design in practice. The role of the participants for psychological, you're going to treat the participants as subjects, whereas in the design based, it involves different participants in the design so as to bring their differing expertise into producing and analyzing the design. So, design based does seem very similar to formative evaluation, but it is different. What separates it is a constant impulse towards connecting design interventions with existing theory. Um, it may generate new theories. It's not simply just testing the existing theories. A critical component is not just to meet the local needs, but to advance a theoretical agenda, to uncover, to explore, to confirm theoretical relationships. It is meant to advance. Proving local theories is not sufficient. Advancing credible assertions. So, an important question that needs to be answered is what counts as credible evidence? The design must draw connections to theoretical assertions and claims that transcend the local context. Local consequences and utility is not enough. It must include a narrative. It should include a series of related plots and describe the changes over time so that the reader understands what changes were made and why they were necessary. The validation of a particular design framework is not simply intended to show the value of a particular curriculum, but results in the advancement of a particular set of theoretical constructs. A part of the difficulty is that the designer is also the researcher. The changes are caused by their design, so findings are more artificial than naturalistic. The theory should be able to sustain changes, therefore making it stronger. The theory must strike a balance between refinement and adaptability. Defining the naturalistic context, um, there's fuzzy boundaries. It's the responsibility of the researcher to draw on methodological practices consistent with other qualitative methods to convince others of the credibility of their claims. Also, the researcher influences context, so it may not be generalizable to other contexts where the researcher does not directly influence the context. Need to be able to take the design and use it in a broader sense. If not, then it just becomes useful in very strict or limited conditions. For example, one study showed the effectiveness of a particular design, but the class where this took place only had 20 students. So the university where this experiment happened normally has lab sizes of 100 to 150. So in order for the design to work, it required them to have class sizes of 20 or so, and it also required them to have teachers with special training. So neither model was profitable, so it couldn't be used. So an example that I found was developing a flipped learning approach to support student engagement, a design-based research of secondary school mathematics teaching. Um, so the problem that they had was how can we support positive student engagement in a flipped classroom? And the theories that they were going to use were the student engagement and the self-determination theory. The student engagement theory is important for learning because of its association with various desirable outcomes, just such as lower dropout rates and students' increased willingness to go beyond the course requirements. The self-determination theory, human beings have three fundamental psychological needs: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. If these needs are satisfied, students are more likely to engage in the learning process. So the sample that they first used in the first iteration was two subsets of 12th grade Hong Kong students, uh, which 13 of them were underperforming students and the other 24 were high ability students. So the first thing that they did was analyze these students, um, and then to see what was effective with the flipped classroom, what they were doing. So they used several flipped classroom activities, pre-class activities, in-class activities, um, and then they evaluated what was working, what was not. And so they were trying to put this into practice into the same school as the subgroups, where the subgroups were. They had two empirical studies on the third step, and then the study used the fourth the sorry the study used the action research approach used an action research approach with an objective of gaining experience with the practice of flipped learning in regular classes and preparing a long-term implementation. So they did iterations of 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks they would adjust it and then start over again. So some adjustments were made to the second iteration based on experiences from the first iteration. Uh, the student engagement evaluated at the student engagement it was evaluated at the completion of each iteration. So the initial results were that the lesson plans could not be a one size fits all. It was too difficult for the underachieving students, and it ended up being too easy for the high ability students. Um, so they they needed to have a better explanation for more difficult topics and more challenging topics for the high ability students, and they needed to keep advanced topics in the classroom so that students can ask questions. Um, the type of video does make a difference. So the Khan Academy style had more interest from students. Short answer quizzes significantly improve students' application of pre-class learning materials compared with the copying of worked answers. So a little bit of background with the flipped classroom. The way it's intended to work is that instead of traditionally go to the classroom and you hear a lecture, do whatever it is that the teacher is asking you to do, and then you go home and you work on the homework. The way that the flipped classroom works is that there's going to be video lessons where you, as the student, are going to watch these lessons from home, and you can do it at any time that you want, but that's what you're going to do. So your homework is actually seeing the lecture for the first time on video. And then when you come to the classroom, you're not actually going through lecture, you're now doing the homework. So that's why it's called flip, because the lecture is at home, and then in the classroom is what we traditionally would call the homework. So one of the problems that they ran into with the short answer quizzes was that it was very hard to make short answer free response quizzes where you could take the solutions to a geometric problem. Say the solution was triangle ABC. Well, you could write the solution as triangle ABC or BCA or CAB, and they all mean the same thing. And so it was taking a long time for these teachers to make these types of questions. So one of the changes that they made for the second iteration was to make these quizzes multiple choice. So in the second cycle, they analyzed 8th grade students and the 11th grade students. And so they changed the types of videos that they had. Again, they made the quizzes multiple choice, and they reserved the difficult topics for face-to-face. And the evaluation this time around was a year long. What they found was that the students in the flipped classroom performed better on their post-test than students in the traditional class, and better than the students in even the first iteration. So findings, as far as behavioral engagement and cognitive engagement, it ended up being better, or they had significantly higher scores on the engagement and the cognitive engagement as opposed to students in traditional classroom, and even higher than the students in the very first iteration. And they created a design that used the 5 principles recommended by the evaluation. So the 5 principles are to use con-style videos with the teacher's talking head to deliver basic materials before class. And so what they're seeing on the screen is the actual handwriting, and it ended up making them feel like they were more engaged when it was like that. They assigned gamified online exercises on pre-class materials, allocate a portion of class time to follow up students' pre-class learning, present difficult materials in face-to-face lessons, and facilitate peer interactions using small group problem-solving exercises. Further research that they concluded with was that they needed to further research the further research required to test design principles in different contexts, so in elementary schools and in colleges and universities. And will the design work for other subjects besides math? So would the 5 principles still work, say, for an English class or a biology class or a history class? And will it work on specific subsets of students? Because they didn't test for that in the initial design.